over. First turnover in about 9 minutes of game action, and Segrist lays it in on the other end.
The Indiana Fever's bold decision to part ways with Dana Bonner in the middle of the season was not a disrespectful act toward a legendary player, but rather a respectful acknowledgement of the championship culture they are determined to build. And in fact, this moment may very well be remembered as the turning point where the Fever solidified their identity as Caitlin Clark's team completely, unapologetically, and without compromise. Because when you step back and look at everything surrounding this situation, the timing, the financial implications, the immediate roster adjustment, the team chemistry improvements, and Clark's own response, it becomes clear that Indiana is fully invested in building a dynasty around a generational superstar whose presence has not only transformed the trajectory of the franchise, but also redefined what it means to be the cornerstone of a professional sports organization. And what stands out most is that Caitlin Clark handled the entire situation with the kind of maturity, poise, and leadership that explains exactly why the Fever made the decision they did. Because she didn't create unnecessary drama, she didn't throw anyone under the bus, she didn't make veiled comments to the media or stir up narratives on social media, she simply did what great leaders do: kept her head down, focused on her craft, elevated her teammates, and kept her eyes locked on the ultimate prize of bringing a championship to Indianapolis, which is why this story resonates far beyond the box score or the transaction wire. Because Clark's basketball IQ is about far more than just her ability to read defenses, hit impossible shots, and dish out jaw-dropping assists. It's also about her understanding of the psychology of team dynamics, of the importance of chemistry, of the recognition that sometimes the best thing you can do for a locker room is remove elements that don't fit, even if those elements are talented, decorated, and respected. And that is where Dana Bonner's departure makes sense, because when she publicly admitted that the fit didn't work out, she was simply confirming what every fan, analyst, and teammate could already see on the court: that her skill set and preferred style of play were not being maximized in a system deliberately built around Clark's unique abilities. And while her 7.1 points per game average may seem like a statistical critique, it was never about being washed up or incapable, it was about a mismatch of philosophy. Because Bonner wanted post-ups and isolations while the Fever wanted pace, transition, quick-hitting pick-and-rolls, and floor spacing. And in basketball, fit matters more than talent. And so when the Fever made the decision, they didn't just remove Bonner, they immediately filled her roster spot with Ari McDonald, a guard who understood from day one that her role was to complement Clark, not compete with her. And that singular adjustment created a cleaner rotation where everyone knew exactly what they were supposed to do, where touches and responsibilities were defined, and where chemistry naturally flourished without the tension of conflicting roles. Which is why the timing of this move is so revealing about the Fever's priorities. Because yes, they could have waited until the offseason and handled everything quietly, but they didn't. They acted mid-season, fully aware that such moves are risky, but also fully convinced that protecting their long-term vision was worth any short-term disruption. And here's what makes it even more significant: the financial cost. Because Indiana essentially ate Bonner's contract, getting nothing in return. And organizations simply do not make expensive, reputation-risking moves like this unless they are absolutely certain about the direction they are taking. And in this case, that direction is Caitlin Clark. Because every ounce of evidence, from the ticket sales to the jersey numbers to the television ratings to the cultural momentum, proves that maximizing her performance and keeping her environment optimized is not just a basketball decision but a business one. And the Fever know their financial future is directly tied to Clark's on-court success, which is why they chose to take a financial hit now rather than compromise a system that elevates her. And the contrast between how both players handled the situation speaks volumes to. Because while Bonner requested a trade and had to be waived, Clark never once complained publicly, never made veiled comments about teammates, never let the distractions seep into her game, instead continuing to play at an elite level, night after night, while letting the front office handle the business side. And that is the exact kind of mature leadership you need from your franchise cornerstone. Because the Fever's message here is not complicated, it is crystal clear. Caitlin Clark is the centerpiece of everything. She is the vision, she is the system, she is the priority, and when conflicts arise, they will side with her 100% of the time. Not partially, not conditionally, but completely. Because that is what you do when you have a generational talent who has already proven she can transform a franchise's fortunes in record time. And this isn't about disrespecting Dana Bonner or erasing her incredible career accomplishments. It is about recognizing the truth that not all talented players fit together, that sometimes even great players clash stylistically, and that winning cultures are built not by forcing puzzle pieces together, but by removing the ones that don't align so that the bigger picture can emerge. And when you dive deeper into the business reality, it becomes even more obvious why the Fever acted quickly. Because Caitlin Clark has turned Indiana into one of the most valuable franchises in women's sports almost overnight. With her rookie season producing a 0+ average home attendance, nearly doubling the previous year. Road games selling out arenas that hadn't seen full capacity in years, television ratings smashing WNBA records multiple times, and merchandise sales skyrocketing with Clark jerseys outselling established NBA stars. And these aren't just feel-good anecdotes about growing the women's game. They are hard numbers that directly fund better facilities, coaching investments, and development programs. Meaning every decision to optimize Clark's game has a measurable dollar impact, and that kind of reality forces executives to think not just about basketball but about economics, branding, and long-term sustainability, and in this case, everything pointed toward choosing Clark's system over Bonner's comfort zone. And if you compare how the two players handled the media, the difference becomes even sharper, because Bonner's frustrations, while not explosive, did surface in interviews, whereas Clark consistently deflected individual conflicts and redirected attention toward team goals, never once throwing anyone under the bus even when baited with direct questions about roster changes, which is remarkable maturity for a player in just her second year, because most superstars take years to develop the media savvy and emotional intelligence she already displays. And that's part of why the Fever know they can trust her not only as their best player but as their public face, because she represents the franchise with professionalism and vision that inspires confidence from ownership, coaches, teammates, and fans alike, and beyond the optics. The basketball analytics also validate the move, because advanced metrics showed that in lineups where Bonner played significant minutes alongside Clark, the team's offensive efficiency dropped compared to lineups where players who naturally complemented Clark took the floor. And while Bonner's preferred style of isolation and post-ups can be effective in certain systems, they slow down the pace and flow that make Clark nearly unstoppable in transition or in quick pick-and-roll sets. And when a coaching staff has to decide between slowing down their best player or asking a veteran to adapt, the choice is obvious, and Stephanie White's staff made the right one. They trusted Clark's system, and the results are undeniable, because other veterans like Aaliyah Boston and Kelsey Mitchell adapted beautifully, thriving in Clark-centric schemes without demanding stylistic changes, proving that the system itself wasn't flawed but simply incompatible with Bonner's specific skill set. And that's the key point. This was never about age or decline, it was about fit. And the Fever handled it with professionalism by not leaking negative stories or trashing Bonner in the press. Simply making a clean business decision and moving forward. And when you look at the league-wide reaction, you see the truth emerge. While some criticized Indiana for not accommodating a veteran, many analysts acknowledged that fit trumps raw talent. And even Bonner's biggest supporters admitted the situation wasn't working, and the aftermath proved Indiana right, because the team chemistry immediately improved. Rotations tightened, roles clarified, and players no longer had to navigate the politics of touches, which created the perfect environment for Clark to thrive even further. And this is exactly what the Fever need if they want to transition from being a playoff contender to being a dynasty, because dynasties are not built on compromise, they are built on conviction, and Indiana just showed they have the conviction to make unpopular but necessary moves in order to chase championships. And years from now, fans may very well look back on this decision as the inflection point where the Fever stopped being just a team with a star and became the organization that fully committed to building around Caitlin Clark's generational brilliance. And everything from the business realities to the cultural impact to the basketball.
To Boston, she's got a mismatch inside.
Boston getting tangled up with Atkins. Boston pops free. Oh, a difficult little pop-up shot.
When you step back and look at what just unfolded with the Indiana Fever, it feels less like a routine roster move and more like the kind of defining moment that will be talked about for decades. Because what the Fever did when Dana Bonner demanded a trade after just 13 games was a statement to the entire basketball world that this franchise is all in on Caitlin Clark and will stop at nothing to ensure that everything in Indiana revolves around maximizing her greatness. And that decision, as harsh and as dramatic as it might look on the surface, actually represents one of the smartest and boldest moves in the history of the organization. Because when you have a once-in-a-generation star, You don't hesitate. You don't compromise. You don't waste time trying to make everyone happy. You make the difficult choice that secures your future. And that is exactly what the Fever did by waving goodbye to a 6-time All-Star, a champion, and a veteran presence that, on paper, seemed like the perfect complement but in practice turned out to be a roadblock to the evolution of a new dynasty. And it all comes back to Clark. The 23-year-old phenom who has already changed the face of women's basketball in ways that numbers can barely capture, because the truth is that she doesn't just play the game. She redefines it, and you could feel from the moment she stepped onto a WNBA floor that this was no ordinary rookie. This was someone who carried the aura of inevitability. Someone who attracted millions of new fans. Someone who didn't just belong on the court with legends but forced those legends to adjust their games to try and survive against her. So when Dana Bonner, after being brought in to mentor, to guide, to stabilize, started showing discomfort with her role and ultimately demanded to leave, the Fever didn't flinch, because their entire philosophy has been clear from day one. That everything flows through Caitlin Clark, and anyone unwilling or unable to align with that vision has no long-term future in Indiana. And that's what makes this story fascinating, because you don't often see franchises choose the future over the past so decisively. And yet here we are, with the Fever making the call that reverberates beyond just their locker room. Because it sends a message to the entire league that there's a new power rising, a new model for how to build around generational talents, and it's going to change the calculus for years to come. Think about how quickly this transformation happened. How Clark went from being a college phenomenon to a professional franchise centerpiece in the blink of an eye. How she carried a lottery team into playoff contention in her rookie season. How she broke attendance records, set viewership highs, and made the Fever a must-see attraction every single night. And now, only in year 2, the team has already had to make one of those hard choices that great organizations eventually face, where you either bend your philosophy to accommodate veterans or you double down on the star who is redefining the sport, and the Fever doubled down. No hesitation, no looking back. Because they understood that trying to shoehorn Bonner's preferences, her desire for touches, for isolation moments into an offensive system built entirely to showcase Clark's unique pace, vision, and creativity would only drag the team backward. And so even though the respect for Dana was real, even though players and fans loved her, the Fever knew that the marriage simply didn't work, and more importantly, that it never would. Because Caitlin Clark doesn't need babysitting, doesn't need a veteran to hold her hand, doesn't need to be shown the way to greatness, because she is already there, already transcending expectations, already elevating everyone else in ways that Bonner, for all her accolades, couldn't quite adapt to. You could see it in the numbers, you could see it in the film, and you could see it in the body language. Because in 13 games Bonner averaged just 7.1 points, while looking uncomfortable in a system that asked her to be a complementary piece rather than the hub, and in a league where windows close quickly and every decision matters. That kind of mismatch couldn't last. Not when the stakes are this high. Not when you're building around someone who might go down as one of the greatest to ever touch a basketball. So when Bonner left for personal reasons, missing 6 games with vague explanations, the writing was already on the wall. And by the time the news broke that she had no intentions of returning, the Fever didn't just quietly accept it, they embraced it as a chance to cement their identity. What makes this fascinating is that it also reveals how much the psychology of team building has changed. Because in an older era, a franchise might have bent over backwards to appease a veteran champion, might have slowed things down to make her comfortable, might have tried to force harmony through compromise. But the Fever refused to make that mistake, because they've seen the blueprint in other leagues. They've studied how organizations like the Milwaukee Bucks didn't change their offense when veterans struggled to keep up with Giannis. How the Golden State Warriors didn't slow down their revolutionary pace to accommodate older players uncomfortable with Steph Curry's style. And they realized that the future belongs to those who maximize their stars rather than minimize them. And that's exactly what they're doing with Clark. And if you step back and think about it, the symbolism is powerful, because waving Dana Bonner isn't just the end of a short-lived experiment. It's the official coronation of Caitlin Clark as the unquestioned center of the Fever universe, the beacon around which every move will orbit, the gravitational force pulling in teammates, coaches, fans, media, and even opponents. Because whether people love her or resent her, they all have to admit that she has already bent the league to her will, and Indiana just proved they're going to let her bend the franchise to What makes this entire saga with Caitlin Clark and Dana Bonner even more fascinating is that it's not just about one trade demand, one player leaving, or one team doubling down on its future. It's really a mirror into the larger transformation of women's basketball, because what Clark represents goes so far beyond the court that every decision made around her feels like a referendum on where the WNBA is heading. And the Fever, by embracing the difficult choice of letting a respected veteran walk, essentially announced that they aren't afraid to carry the weight of that future, because Caitlin Clark isn't just a scorer or a shooter. She is a revolution disguised in a jersey, and when revolutions happen, there's always friction. There's always resistance. There's always someone who feels uncomfortable watching the old ways collapse and the new ways rise. And Dana Bonner, through no fault of her own, simply ended up on the wrong side of that shift, because while her game had been dominant for years, footwork in the post, mid-range touch, veteran craft, the reality is that the Fever offense is no longer built for that kind of tempo. It's built for the modern spectacle that Clark thrives in. High pace, deep range, instant reads, long rebounds leading to transition firepower, and anyone unwilling to buy into that becomes not an asset but a liability, which is why Indiana had no choice but to make peace with losing Bonner and turning the page. But this is where it gets even more interesting, because Bonner's departure, as shocking as it seemed on the surface, has actually liberated the Fever, and you can see it in how their spacing has improved. How younger players like Nolissa Smith and Aaliyah Boston